Hi, I'm Liz Whiteacre, and in this video, we are going to continue our conversation of publication and explore the etiquette behind the submission process. Our goals today are understanding the editor's perspective, the people who receive our work and make decisions about what and what not to publish, the timelines that we can expect, the process itself, as well as handling rejection and acceptance, and also thinking about how we can take what we learn about submitting to literary journals and magazines and apply that to possibly contests and full length or chapbook submissions. It's also important to keep in mind throughout this presentation that this is a recursive process, so we are going to be circling back through it many times. It's important to think about what editors are looking for before you reach out to them and share your work. Oftentimes, as we saw in the last video, editors will share what it is they look for in submissions, and it's important to pay close attention to that. Making sure to take time to look at not only the mission statement or the value statement or the specific instructions of what they would like to see in submissions, it's also a good idea to take a look at past issues of the magazine or journal or other books that a press has published or other contest winners to get an idea of whether or not you are a good fit. The more time you put into choosing who you'd like to share your work to, the more you will find that editors are interested in your work. For example, if you are writing about cats and submitting to a magazine that only publishes work about ducks, you're going to annoy that editor, right? And it'll have been a waste of your time and their time. So set yourself up for success with following those guidelines. Most editors are also looking for things that spark their interest. So, if you are mindful about the particular poems that you put in a set and give them a great experience for the 3 to 5 things that they are going to be reading of your work, and if those things are aligning with the type, style, theme, subject matters that they've said that they have wanted to publish in future issues of the magazine, probably they're going to get curious and say, oh, whoa, what is this? Let me give this a second, third, fourth read. Editors are also looking for people who are submitting their work to be polished and professional. And that's why we're taking an entire video to talk about this process. So as an emerging beginning poet, you understand what's up. So that way you can present yourself professionally and make sure that you are submitting polished poems. Timeline expectations. Different magazines and journals are going to have different timelines for how long it takes them to review submissions. And usually that information is communicated to you in their submission guidelines. So as we took a look in the previous video, there was a magazine that had a very quick turnaround and asked you not to submit multiple your poem to multiple publications at the same time. Then there are magazines that might take a while. Perhaps they receive 100,000 poems a year. That seems like a big number, but some of the really big magazines they could easily be hitting that at least several hundred per issue, and so it just takes them a while to get through all of that and make decisions. Other magazines that are associated with a university, say, where they're working on an academic term, right? They might say, well, we start in August, we wrap up in December. So that will be the amount of time you can kind of expect to hear from us in 2 to 3 months. Whatever that timeline is that's shared with you, it's always a good idea to take a note. Whether you have set up an Excel spreadsheet and you've said, okay, this magazine, these poems, this date I could expect to hear by, or if you email yourself and say, hey, don't forget you submitted to this place, and you might attach your files that you were sharing with that particular editor. You might also include a hyperlink to the submission guidelines, and you might make a note, hear back right? And then you can just file that email to yourself. I find I'm using that email yourself method more and more, and just have a really organized folder system in my Gmail account. I've gotten a little bit away of keeping a detailed Excel spreadsheet if you want to do it on recipe cards. So you remind yourself, oh, hey, I submitted this in August. I'm going to forget about it. I won't hear back until November, right? Now, if you're told it could take up to 6 months, and you're thinking, whatever happened with that magazine, publisher, etc., and you look at your notes, you're like, whoa, it's been 12 months. You can absolutely contact the editors at that publication and say something as simple as, hello, I'm writing to inquire about the status of my submission, and share the name of the poem or poems and the date that you submitted it on. Sometimes, let's say you're communicating via submittable, somebody just forgets to hit a button to let you know that it was rejected, or sometimes even accepted. Sometimes, they are just overwhelmed with work and it's taking longer than they expected. So if you've exceeded the amount of time that they have shared, it's okay to reach out to them politely and just say, hi, what's up? Um, what you want to avoid is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Like contacting them every week. Have you decided? Have you decided? Have you decided? So definitely keep an eye on those estimations that the editors are providing you. The process for submission is you're writing a bunch of poems, and then you revise them and polish them. You do research to figure out where could you send these poems for publication. You submit for publication, and you record where you sent it, what you did, right? And then you wait, and then you wait, and then you wait. You respond to the editors once you find out if your work has been accepted or not accepted. You update those records and you repeat. So it's always a great idea to be writing and revising and sending stuff out kind of all at the same time. Some people like to wait. They go through a period of creation, they go through a period of revision, and then they have a particular month or two where they send work out, and then they start that process over. Some people like to have it happening all the time. In a given week, they might write a few poems, they might revise a few poems, and they might send a couple of the poems that they've finished the week before out for publication. So you can find your own pace, but it is important to think about making sure you're generating new material once you have sent out some poems that feel finished for publication. If you wait until you hear back from those, you might have missed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months of new work that then could go out once you're hearing back. It's important that you do your research and you use that research. If you have put in some time and you've identified some really cool places where you'd like to submit your work, when you have the poems to submit, don't discount that research. Make sure that you have a great organizational system so that you can go back into your Drive folder, or go into the folder on your desktop, or go into your paper folder. If it's something that you're printing out and keeping in a filing cabinet, or you have it written in a notebook, make sure that you make use of that so that the time you're putting in to find cool places to submit your work to is connected to your process. And you might think, well, yeah, no brainer. But I am guilty myself sometimes. I'll find a folder where I have a Word document that says, hey, here's some cool places to submit. And I think, why haven't I ever submitted to these places? I just forgot that I had done that research. So be mindful about where you store the information you learn about places you'd like to submit your work to. Another great thing you can do is say, use your Google Calendar. And if you know the submission deadline is April, you can put on your calendar, April 1st, submit to X by April 15th. And then you have that reminder in your calendar to do it. And so that can be a great way to do that as well. And you could choose to, in your calendar, just put a link in the notes to the submission guidelines for that particular place. And that can be a great way to keep it on your radar and make sure that you're submitting when you have published work. We're going to take a few moments to return to some of the literary magazines we featured in the last video and talk about some of the terms that you're going to see pop up in different submission guidelines so that you feel comfortable when you see those and know what to expect. For example, we're returning to the red tree review. If you notice up at the top with the very first highlight, they say that they collect submissions on a rolling basis. And that is what it sounds. They are always looking at work that comes in. They're asking people to submit by email. So as emails are coming in, they're looking and they're making decisions. So likely there is a fairly quick turnaround, and your work might be submitted in the fall, but they might choose to include your work in a winter issue, not the fall issue. So they are being very fluid as they kind of pick up things that they see that they like, and then they are planning out when they would like to publish those. Where you'll see other literary magazines giving you specific deadlines, right? We accept from May 1st to August 8th, right? It can be really, really specific. Previously published work, that's the next highlighted language there in the submission guidelines. Previously published work means the poems that you have had published in literary magazines, journals, anthologies, contests, books. Where things get a little gray are when you have put your poems on your own private social media or on your blog. Some magazines are okay with that, but some magazines are not. So if maybe you shared some earlier drafts of poems just to get feedback from the folks who follow you, you've gotten that feedback, you've revised, you might choose to take those drafts down and then send them out for publication. And if they get picked up, then they'll be published by those different venues. Another thing can be self-publishing. If you have put together your own book and you're selling it through Amazon, many magazines would consider that previously published work. So if you're not sure, it's always a good idea to check in with a writer who has more experience, who might be able to answer those questions for you. Or you could send a quick email to the editors in advance of your submissions and ask them and say, hey, does this work for your magazine, or would you prefer I submit something absolutely not previously published? Simultaneous submissions, that means you can have a packet of 3 poems, poem A, B, and C, and you're sending that packet of poems out to 5 different magazines all at the same time. Red Tree Review is okay with that, but they just want to they just ask that you let them know if somebody else says they're going to publish your work. This is a little bit different than multiple submissions, which usually means that you can submit your packet A, B, and C. You can submit your packet to, I don't know, LMN, right, at the same time to the same magazine. Now you'll notice here that Red Tree Review would not be cool with multiple submissions. In fact, they've asked you to submit only once every 6 months. But there are sometimes publishers who allow you to submit in multiple categories. So you might be submitting some poems and some photographs and an essay, and they would be very cool with you doing all of those at the same time. That would be multiple submissions, or maybe a contest where you could submit multiple poems for that particular contest. Different from simultaneous, where the same poem is being given to different editors and they all have at the same moment in time, right? The first one wins it. If you look down at the very bottom, you're going to see monetary compensation. Different magazines can offer different things to a writer. And we talked in the last video a little bit about the different funding sources that come up. But here, Red Tree Review lets you know up front that they cannot offer monetary compensation. Again, this is a brand new literary magazine in its very beginning. So they are probably working for free to produce this. Other times you might see we pay $3 per poem or we pay this much per poem, or we give you X many copies of the magazine for free, which are called contributor copies. And then another thing I wanted to point to was upon publication, all rights revert back to the author. This is called first rights. And this deals with copyright. So what you're saying to Red Tree Review and most other magazines is that they get to be the very first people to publish your poem. And once they have published it, you can do whatever you want with that poem as long as you give them credit for having published it first. And you'll see there too, authors are asked to acknowledge the Red Tree Review in any future publications in which the work appears. So that means if you want to take that poem and post it on your social media or put it into a contest or submit it for an anthology, right? Or it's going to get reprinted in a newspaper or on a blog or somebody's website. They just say, let everybody know, originally published in Red Tree Review volume, whatever it was. Here, if we take a look at etchings, I wanted to point out the term blind submission. So in this particular magazine, which is different than the Red Tree Review, where you're sending an email and identifying yourself to them, up front, etching says, we don't want to know who you are when we look at your work, right? So that's a blind submission where pretty much only the editor that you are submitting the work to, often the managing editor, will know who you are. The file, right, or files that have your poems will go to the editors who are reading and making decisions about publication without your name on them. So they're asking you, please don't put your name all over stuff, right? They don't want to have to take all of the time to go in and remove your name from every single page of your document or have to rename your files and that sort of thing. So if you see blind submission, pay close attention and make sure that you're not providing identifying information. And this becomes important to do a careful review if, say, you're submitting a full book, a full-length collection, or a chapbook where you might have mentioned your name in poems, right? Or in an about or in an acknowledgement section. So you might have to carefully go through and kind of redact those moments so that you're not giving away your identity in the collection. And then I wanted to come back to the Atlantic's call because they mentioned succinct pitches may be submitted in the body of an email. And so this points towards the cover letter, right? You're not just going to send the Atlantic a file with nothing in the email. Please don't. Right? Please don't do that to anyone really, certainly any magazine, any editor. And so what they're saying is that you have an opportunity to say something about you and your work when you give it to the editors. They're not doing this blind. They're looking at you as a whole package. And not just your work. And so you have an opportunity to say, hey, I've done this, I've built this particular audience. I would be able to share, your publication of my work on these different social media channels, et cetera, so that you're kind of helping promote the Atlantic if they choose to accept your work that you've submitted to them. That was a lot to take in. So we're going to take a moment to review what we already know, some things that we've been preparing for in the last few videos. So before you are going to get started and have a submission session soon, you're going to want to make sure that you have at the ready the polished poems that you want to send out. And I would even say kind of have an idea of how you might like to group those. Have your author bio or bios if you have a couple different versions, cover letter template, and we'll talk about that in a moment, your author headshot in case it's asked for. That's the least used option. And then wherever you're recording your records. So as you're doing stuff, you can be taking notes so you don't forget what you've done. It's super easy to do that. Formatting. All right. It gets a little frustrating sometimes, especially when you're, say, sitting down for an hour and submitting to 10 magazines. There is no one way to format and submit your work. There's no universal system that everybody uses. The advent of technologies like platforms, Submittable, Duotrope, these different things have helped streamline the process a little bit in the way they present their forms, but things are always a little bit different. So it's important to remember that editor is always right. Right? If I've been an editor and publisher, if I have 500 things to read and I am able to cut off at the top 200 of those things because people didn't follow the directions, and then I can really just focus my time and energy on that 300, less work for me, especially if I'm not getting paid and I'm volunteering to do this. So make sure you follow the directions. Even if it sounds crazy, if you're like, what? That font's terrible. I don't want to put it. Use that editor's preferred font, right? Follow their process. It gets you in the door. It shows you're polished. It shows you're professional. It shows you have paid attention to what they have asked for. So follow the rules. Follow the rules. A Word versus a PDF file. A lot of times you will be given options. Most editors in the industry, most publications will be asking for Word files. And if you don't have Microsoft Word, you are able to convert to Word from a Mac Pages and also Google Docs. So you can export into Word. Some will say RTF files are okay, and that is more of a universal compatibility. If I have an RTF file, I can often open it up in Word or Pages, etc. So if you don't have Word and you can't export, then PDF is always an option for most publishers. PDF is kind of like a picture of your document. When they receive the PDF, they can't get in and do anything. They can't move the cursor around. They couldn't delete anything. So that's important. If they've asked for a blind submission and you put your name in there and they can't get in there to take your name out, right? You might be out without ever even getting into the mix to have your work read. I choose to submit a PDF when I have funky formatting. So I usually default to Word just because as an editor, it makes it so easy then to be like, right, I got the Word, I can pick it up and paste it into InDesign or whatever program I need to use. So it's kind of a one-stop. If I receive PDF, then I reach out and say, could I please get it in this other format so I can work with the text and get it into the master file for the particular issue. But if I have something that has a lot of interesting spacing, maybe a lot of stagers, the texts are all over the page, or I'm doing something with font, I will choose to do a PDF. So that way it will open the exact same way on their computer screen, regardless of what program they have, regardless of what size it has. So that might be a reason to do a PDF rather than a Word, even though you could do Word, is if you want to preserve that formatting so nothing shifts when it's opened up on someone else's computer. In the end, readability is the goal. So following the directions, make sure it's easy to read. I would say that if you've not been told a specific font, some great fonts to go back to would be Times New Roman. Some I see editors asking for are Cambria and also Garamond. So something with a serif, sans serif, Arial would be a great choice. Something easy to read. That would be the goal if you're not told specifically use this. And I would put it in 12-point font. And I would also make sure to single space your poems. Double spacing is rare. And if it is intentional, you have one line stanzas, then that might be something that you could communicate to the editor so they don't think, oh, well, we're just going to shrink that up into single spacing when we go to publish it. That could be something to communicate if they decide that they want to pick up your work. So here's an example. One is a blind submission. So the one on the top shows no Liz Whiteacre even in the file name, and the one on the bottom does have my name worked in. I personally prefer to indent the author credit once, so it's clear that that's not part of the poem. And then I followed the instructions specifically for a particular submission guideline on how to name the file and what font that they wanted to have. In this case, they were requesting Times New Roman. Sometimes you will be asked to include a cover sheet, and this would happen before all of the poems that you have listed. And oftentimes you'll see this requested for contests where they'll kind of have this sheet and then either remove it or be able to print it out and then give the rest of the stuff without any information on it to the people reading for the contest or reading for the general submission. So this is an example of what this would look like. I do recommend using insert page break in between your different elements, so that way the titles always appear on the very top line. Another thing you might be asked to do is include a cover letter or just an email for your submission. And so this is one I really did send out, although the phone numbers didn't change for privacy. And so if you look, it's very simple. The cover letter isn't about making friends. It's not about trying to catch somebody's interest. It's really just a piece of paper that helps the editors connect your poems to your work. And in some cases, when they've requested it, it might also include that pitch. And we're going to take a look at one that's a little bit more lengthy than this in a few moments. So this is something that you can borrow from. Dear, put in the name of the editor. Take the few extra minutes to look at the masthead and see who is the poetry editor. Who am I sending this to? If just no one is identified, then you could say editorial team or dear editor or dear editors. But if you can find the person who's going to be reading your work, excellent. Notice here that I didn't say Ms., right? Sometimes you'll have people's first names or you don't know how they choose to identify themselves. And so I prefer these days just to include the person's full name. You can, use your style of communication, but that's why I've done that there. I'm writing to submit 2 poems, title, pasted below, which is what Ms. Blevins indicated, for publication in Literary Mama, right? So you're just telling them, I'm giving you these specific things for publication. This magazine requested an author's bio, and so I stuck that in. And then I ended my cover letter with, if you have any questions about my submission, please contact me at this email or phone number. And I think it's always important that you end with, thank you for your time and consideration, best wishes, sincerely, whatever your signature sign off is, and then your name. Again, this is a template. This was handed to me 20 years ago when I first started doing this. This is standard. It's not cheating to borrow this type of language, but this is the basic. This can only make a good first impression, right? If I tell them about my favorite food and how many cats I have and all of this stuff about me and my work, I don't want to be remembered for that, right? I want to be remembered for the poems that I'm giving them. And here's an example of a cover letter that I would prepare in Word, and then I would copy and paste into Submittable or Duotrope. When you are using one of those platforms, there will be a space for cover letter / biographical information, and most editors will ask you to use it in some way. So again, this is a very simple, get the job done. Dear Words Magazine editorial team, I could not find any specific names, and so I used the magazine's title there. I'm writing to submit my poem, Pain Flirts, for publication. Name the publication. Here is the bio. Thank you for your time and consideration. Notice I didn't provide any additional contact information here because it's already included in my submittable or duotrope form. So I felt that would be repetitive. So record keeping. Make sure you keep track of what poems you have out, where they are, this becomes important because, hey, I got an acceptance. I need to check and make sure that these poems aren't in the hands of other editors. And if they are, I need to email them and withdraw my submission. Um, it can be a panic if, right? It's like getting asked out by two different people for a date on the same exact night, and you said yes, and you can't be in two places at once, right? So if magazine A says, yes, we're going to submit your work, you need to tell magazines B, C, D, and E, I'm sorry, uh, I need to withdraw. Someone else is going to be publishing these poems. And they will be really pleased with that. They'll be sad that they missed out, but that's way better than saying, hey, magazine B wants to publish your work too. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I already told magazine A a couple months ago and it came out. And well, would you want to reprint it? Mm-mm. That's not what they're interested in. They're not interested in reprints. So make sure you know where your poems are. I would provide the contact information in my notes, the email, or at least the URL to the website of the publication so that way I can contact them. I would take note of their timeline, maybe put the date that I submitted and, you know, 6 months or something like that, or check on April 15th. So I have a reminder for myself. And then what are the fates, right? Were they rejected? Were they accepted? If they were accepted, then they're out of commission unless you're looking at anthologies or you're looking to put them into a collection, a book that you're going to be trying to sell. Or maybe there's an instance where a magazine might say, we will accept previously published work. We're happy to reprint. So make sure that you have good records of where you're at, so you always know, and it saves you trouble and drama down the road. So after this video, you are going to know what you need to know to get started. And my recommendations are to go slow, right? Find a quiet moment where you can really focus on the process. Follow those guidelines, right? Even though those 6 places you picked might be all different, take the time, right? Okay, I'm done with that one. A lot of times you're going to be able to copy and paste. You might be able to reuse things, but make sure that you're focused and doing what each publication asks you to do. Make sure that you're signing up for free accounts and save those passwords. You can get free accounts with Duotrope and Stamitable and these different things. So there could be pro features, but go with the free until you're making a lot of money as a poet. It doesn't really happen very often. Go for free resources. And make sure that even though you're excited, you just send stuff out for publications, you don't stop writing, right? Think of it as the revolving door. You're writing new poems, you're polishing new poems, you're sending them out, and new poems are being generated. And that's how you stay involved with the process and that you always have something new once something has gotten published. There are 3 ways editors might respond to your work to let you know whether or not you've been accepted or rejected. If you're accepted, you might see within submittable, like within a submission platform, or you might receive an email that says, we would love to accept this poem or these poems for publication in this issue, and they will give you instructions, right? They'll kind of say, like, this was what needs to happen. Maybe if they're going to pay you, they need you to fill out some tax forms. Maybe they need your mailing address because they're going to send you some copies. So make sure you read that closely. You're going to be so excited, but make sure you read and respond and say thank you so much. I'm really excited. Let me know, when it's coming out. For rejections, sometimes you will just get a declined button. Clicks, right? And a form letter that says, unfortunately, we cannot accept your work at this time, or unfortunately, this particular batch of poems does not fit with our, style of the magazine or our vision for this issue. Noted, we're going to check it off in your records, feel a little sad, move on, right? Because you've got other work out there, maybe even that same poem is still out with some other places. You don't need to respond to the editors. Sometimes you'll get a personal note from the editors where they'll say, this doesn't work, but we were really intrigued by X. We would love to see more work in the future. And if that's the case, I would reply back either within the platform or the email and say, thank you so much for your feedback and time. I'll look forward to submitting in the future, and then make note, maybe wait a cycle, get some new stuff together, and then submit back to them. They don't do that for everybody, right? Most people just get the form letter. So if there is a personal note from the editor, there might even be something constructive, like we really enjoyed the start of this poem, but it did not resolve in a way that was satisfactory, or maybe you should try this. Hey, take that into advisement, maybe even try those things. And then sometimes you'll get kind of the next level rejection from the editor, where they will request you revise and resubmit that poem, where they might say, hey, we can't accommodate the form of your poem, but we really love the content. Would you be willing to, reformat it within the constraints of, this particular space? Maybe you have really big caesuras and they're a teeny tiny magazine and they just can't fit it in. And then you need to make the decision, well, do I need to maybe find an online publication that can support the current form, or am I willing to reformat this? Maybe they had an issue with a word, or maybe there was some confusion. Would you mind clarifying this? Definitely respond and say thank you so much for the feedback. I will be resubmitting my work. It's attached, or I can get it to you next week, right? Or if you're like, whoa, no, that does not fit with my vision, that's against my morals, I'm not selling out, right? Then you can just say, thank you so much for my time. I will be sure to send you work in the future. I'm gonna find a different home for this poem. So keep it brief, keep it short, but definitely sharing gratitude to the editors. They've got a really hard job. And when they take time to reach out personally, I think that's important. And you should also use that as something that keeps you going and makes you feel good. Even though they said no this time, right? Your work is still interesting and valuable, and you have a chance to share it with other people as well. So rejection and acceptance. This is hard business, folks. I think it can be helpful to think about it not personally, right? When your work is rejected, it's often not because they think it's terrible or they don't like you, right? It's hard to kind of push that distance. But having been on the editorial side of things, I see editors wrestle, and myself wrestle so much with making decisions. They really take time and care and value all of the submissions that come in, and it's a very subjective process. Not only do they need to form a personal connection before they're willing to share it with their wider audience, but you also don't know how many people are making the decision, right? If you've got 7 editors, you could have 3 people who loved it and 4 who wanted to go a different direction. So you might still have fans in there, but just not enough to have your work submitted. You could be competing. Maybe you wrote an amazing tulip poem, but there are 2 other amazing tulip poems and they can't all fit. And so they choose the one that's not yours. Sometimes too, what you've written at that moment in time just doesn't quite jive with the greater picture, right? With the greater vision of what they're trying to do. And so there are a lot of different reasons why your work might get accepted. It could also be that your draft just isn't quite polished enough yet. It feels a little rough. Maybe you had some typos in it you didn't even realize. And so it might just take a little bit more time to freshen it up. And also thinking about it as the right time, right editor, right publication, right poem. This is all of the stars aligning to get that yes. For every yes, there are easily 100 plus no's. So keep that in mind. Don't wallow. I don't recommend. I don't know. You hear these stories of people wallpapering their bathrooms with rejections, or having these big parties where they burn them all, right? It's important to recognize that disappointment and sadness, but I think it's also important to recognize, well, that's just one that didn't take it. There are thousands out there. So keeping yourself motivated, and there will be some acceptances as they go that keep you going, and maybe also sharing your work in other ways can also help keep you motivated to get it out there through many different forms of publication and sharing. So yes, it hurts, absolutely, but it doesn't mean that you aren't an amazing poet with awesome work to share. And so you just have to keep at it and find those other moments. I wanted to take just a brief a brief slide to say how everything I just told you can also be used to help you submit to contests, as well as your larger works, your chapbooks or full-length collections as well, to presses. So with contests, it's going to be pretty much the same process as submitting, just regularly to a magazine, but oftentimes it's blind. So make sure you pay careful attention to your identifying information. Also, make sure that you research the contest carefully. We talked about this a little bit before, but make sure it's legit. Make sure it's respectable. Make sure that the submission fees kind of fall within that regular range of maybe $1 to $25. If they're asking for $100 to participate, right? If this is something where you're going to be a big fish or a small fish, right, there can be lots of pros and cons. And don't forget, there are many ways to get your work published for free. Lots of magazines don't charge submission fees at all. So contests are not the only way to do it. And it's really a lottery, right? You're throwing in $25 to be put in this pool of a couple hundred poets for, one person to be pulled out. So make sure you think about it. I personally always like to choose the path of just regular submissions and seeing how that goes. And so as you're a beginning poet, I might recommend that for you too. So you're not spending a lot of money that you probably need for other things on this process. For chapbooks and collections, again, it'll be very similar to the process we just described, but the cover letter that you write will be bigger. It will include more information. And I think it's worthwhile kind of walking through what those differences are, because you've written a lot of poems. You're probably up around the chapbook number, 16 to 24 poems. So you might have a chapbook in your near future, and this can help you get started with that process. The biggest difference of the cover letter is that you want to talk about your fit with the press and its audience, right? Why would they want to include you within the catalog of books they've published? And also what you can do to help market and promote your work and your book for them, with them. So here's the introductory paragraph of a cover letter for a manuscript I wrote called Soon. And so here, I wanted to let the press know that I have done some research about their work. This is something that is helpful. Being able to take a look at some of the other books that they have created, or going to their website and pulling out their mission statement, can be really nice way to introduce. So you're kind of telling them, why have I picked you, right? It's not just kind of a blind in the dark, just sharing it with everybody. And then a little moment about yourself. This is a little bit different bio than what it would be for, like, to be published on the back of a book. You're letting them know, what have you done that has kind of set you up for success in being an author that they would publish, and also how might your work kind of fall within the context of the different types of work they have been publishing. For example, here I share, much like Marx's collection gives voice to a grief, making it a palpable emotion that readers can also feel and know, I try to give voice to an injury and recover what's familiar, yet little celebrated. When I perform my work, I'm often met with audiences' own stories of trauma. They are pleased by the idea that abstract pain can become concrete, something everyone can name and conquer, right? So kind of taking what I'm trying to do and putting it in context and connecting it to a book that they have published in the past. Here would be the little author bio that would, be used publicly. And then a discussion of what are you willing to do, right? What kind of hustle are you going to do to, if they publish your book, help make it a success? So, were you to select this for publication, I'm prepared to assist in marketing the collection, and you can share what can you do. In my experiences, I can do X, Y, and Z, and so I share that here. And what you are able and willing to do might be totally different. And so it's just kind of a brief discussion of what can be done. And then the close, if you're interested, right? You can reach me at the email that this is coming in or at the telephone number. Thank you for your time and consideration. Thank. Always thank editors for their time, and make sure that you respond to them if they email you with questions and concerns in a timely manner as well. You're about to become business partners, right? If they do pick your work. So you want to show them that you're a professional and a great person to work with through your professional communication. All right, so this is a recursive process. You don't just do it one and done, unless maybe that was the goal and one thing got published and you're done, right? You're going to be writing, you're going to be revising, you're going to be sending things out. It's going to come back and back and back. So it's important to know that the more you do this, the more efficient you'll get, the better your process will be, the easier it will feel. And also, the more you start to publish, I kind of feel like it begets more publications. And, you start to build an audience, and you can add publications to your bio. And when new editors or presses see what you've done in the past, they think, oh, well, this person's kind of been vetted. They have an audience that they could bring. And it just kind of carries and builds its momentum as you move forward. So, skills practice. Open up all those files that you have been creating this term. Get that cover letter template started, right? Pull everything up. Pull up the 3 magazines and journals that you've researched the last couple of weeks and give it a try. Submit. The best way not to get published is to never do it, right? And if you're going into this knowing like, all right, some people are gonna, dig what I'm doing, some people aren't, right? You kind of expect not everybody's going to accept everything, right? The worst they're gonna say is no. And then you move on and share it with somebody else. And nobody's going to know but you. And I guess unless you tell everybody about it. So this is a private process. Yeah, I feel a little weird sharing all of this stuff, but if it helps you out, then it's absolutely worth it. So just give it a try, and then give it a try again, and give it a try again, and see what happens. And again, it does get easier the more you do it. Looking ahead, time to put everything that you've learned in this course to practice, right? What you've learned about writing poems, revising poems, polishing poems, finding ways to share your poems with other people. This is it. And so now it's time to go and repeat the processes over and over again, build your network of poets, writers, readers, audience members through different means like social media, so that you have a support network to help you in your craft, but also help support your craft. It has been a pleasure talking with you about all of these topics. And I hope that you are well on your way to becoming a successful poet and producing things that you're really proud to share with others.